many people who have battled this virus and lived through it. It's a crisis, obviously, the nation, the world is going through. The president wants to talk about it. We'll go live to the White House as soon as we get more details.
As we await that, the government in China is now under intense scrutiny over the origins of coronavirus and how it spread in Wuhan, as President Trump warns he could defund the World Health Organization, saying that the agency bowed to pressure from Beijing to downplay the threat in the early days of the outbreak. Jillian Turner, live in Washington with more on all of that. Hey, Jillian, good morning.
Good morning, Sandra. So the Washington Post is now reporting it's got the smoking gun when it comes to the Chinese government's alleged role in covering up the real origin of the coronavirus. It's got two State Department cables from U.S. officials warning about major security and safety concerns at a Wuhan lab that was testing coronavirus in bats. Now, for weeks, we've heard from the White House and lawmakers that the Chinese Communist Party obstructed evidence and underreported case numbers coming out of Wuhan.
We do know that the virus did not originate in that food market or the wet market or whatever you want to call it.
Now the Post reports that first cable, dated January 2018, quote, warns that the lab's work on bat coronaviruses and their potential human transmission represented a risk of a new SARS-like pandemic. The cables note the lab had insufficient technicians or investigators to operate safely, something Senator Tom Cotton raised with Fox News directly 10 days ago. Take a listen.
It's entirely possible that they were conducting good and reasonable scientific experiments in those laboratories, but they had bad safety practices.
Now, so far, the State Department is not commenting on the existence of either one of these two cables that the Washington report claims to have seen. But Fox News is learning more about the fact that they are allegedly marked sensitive but unclassified, an indication that the cables do contain sensitive national security information. The Chinese government also making new moves now to tamp down on the free flow of scientific information related to coronavirus. It reportedly issued a new order over the weekend that all research papers pertaining to the virus have to now be approved by the government prior to publication. Sources tell Fox News this development, Sandra, is deeply worrisome and a cause for grave concern. They're also saying it's even more reason why the Trump administration should continue to pressure the World Health Organization to make transparent any information it has about the origins of the virus and the way that China managed the virus during the early days of outbreak. Sandra?
Jillian Turner live on that from Washington for us this morning. Jillian, thank you. Ed?
Thanks, Sandra. For more on this, let's bring in our friend, General Jack Keane, retired four-star general, chairman at the Institute for the Study of War, a Fox News senior strategic analyst. General, you'll have to pardon me in advance if either Governor Cuomo starts talking or President Trump. He's got a meeting at the White House as well, so we're monitoring a lot of developments, but we appreciate your insights as always. Talk about the significance of China in all of this in terms of their lack of transparency at the beginning of the virus spread, and now we see them cracking down on any research at all as we try to get to the bottom of it.
Well, what's the evidence we have? We know for a fact that China has not given us what the origin of the disease is. By now, if that disease had occurred in America, we would have been foreclosing that to the entire world. And obviously, they have two labs that deal with this very thing in Wuhan City. So, and now this report makes it very suspicious that that could possibly be the origin. Secondly, they were very deceptive about the actual spread of the epidemic. I mean, they actually punished people. They put it in writing that it wasn't human-to-human transmissions. This is all going on in December and January. And by the end of December, we know they had 105 cases and 15 deaths. Mm-hmm. And as late as mid-January, the World Health Organization, after the director had gone to China, reported out that there were no human-to-human transmissions coming out of China. And then on the 23rd of January, President Xi shuts down ground traffic and air traffic coming out of Hubei province, where Wuhan City is in that province. Mm-hmm. But guess what? He does not shut down international flights. So hundreds of thousands of Chinese were still on the move. And 3 of those flights went into northern Italy every single week, sadly. Listen, they have their hands all over the spread of this. We don't know if it was intentional, but we clearly know it was reckless for sure, Ed, and very deceptive.
And in terms of their intentions, that's something that's going to be looked at very closely in the days ahead, no doubt about it. This Washington Post report you mentioned, a lot of intrigue. We got to see how it all plays out, how the Trump administration responds. General Jack Keane, sorry for the short time today. We've got Governor Cuomo now up in New York. We'll get back to the days ahead. In the meantime, here's Governor Cuomo with his latest update.
Down, which is probably the first tick down. So that's a good sign, but basically flat. So we think we are at the apex, on the plateau. The number of hospitalizations went up, flattened, continuing to flatten. Good sign. Technically, the number's down a tad. Statistically irrelevant, but better than being up. The net change in total hospitalizations, if you look at the curve, which is what we look at, the curve is down. When you do the 3-day average, which is more accurate than any one day, because remember, this reporting mechanism is new. We just put it in during this situation, so I wouldn't bet all the chips on any one day. But when you look at 3 days, you look at the overall curve, we think it's indicative. So the 3-day average is down. The net change in ICU admissions is down. Again, the ICU admissions I take with a grain of salt, since hospitals are no longer what they were, and they're basically all ICU wards. Intubations is a real number. That's the number of people who are being put on a ventilator. About 80% of those people will never come off a ventilator. So when you see the intubations, that is proportionate to the number of people we will lose. And that's what we've been watching all along. People go into the hospital, most get treated and are discharged. Some are not discharged. If they're intubated, about 80% of the people who are intubated will not come off the ventilator. The number of new people going into the hospital per day is also down, but we still have 1,600 new COVID cases yesterday. So we have 1,600 people new coming into the hospital, some being discharged, and the net is what we've been watching. But it's also interesting to note that you still have 1,600 new people walking into the hospital or who are in a hospital and then diagnosed with COVID. So the volume is still high, and that's why the hospitals are still working very hard. We've been watching for growth outside of New York City, Long Island, Westchester, Rockland. That has basically been flat. There have been little hot spots here and there. Department of Health has been very good and aggressive in jumping on those hot spots and tamping them down, test, isolate, trace. And you see the numbers by region across the state. Proportionately, obviously, downstate New York, which is what we've been talking about, but looking for growth towards Long Island, Westchester, Rockland. Rest of the state, proportionately, upstate is very, very low to everything else in the state. This is something else we're watching. This is the number of deaths in nursing homes. And the nursing homes have been an increasing issue. The nursing home issue was flagged by the first cases we had in the state of Washington, because that is the vulnerable population in the vulnerable place. And we've been worrying about nursing homes from day one, as we saw in the state of Washington. But you see the percentage of loss of life is getting higher in the nursing homes compared to the hospitals. Lives lost yesterday, 778. That number is up. And that is, to me, the most painful number. And it has been the most painful number every day. And those New Yorkers are in our thoughts and prayers. You look at the past few days and the number of lives lost, it's basically flat at a devastating level of pain and grief. But It evidences everything else we're seeing, which is basically a flattening at this level. The statisticians will say number of lives lost is a lagging indicator, which is a nice scientific term, but it doesn't mean it just is not just terrible, terrible, terrible news. And
You've been listening to the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, right there, again reiterating, as he has in recent days, he believes the curve is flattening here in New York State. He had positive news about new hospitalizations down in this state, but he was careful to note there were 1,600 new COVID cases yesterday alone. So it's not completely gone, obviously. And important to note, 778 lives lost yesterday here in New York. That was up from 671 the day before. Nonetheless, the governor's saying that the numbers in terms of deaths are flattening, but heartbreaking nonetheless, these numbers that are still very high. Sandra?
We will continue to monitor that, and we await the president. A new way, meanwhile, to wear a face mask while letting your personality shine through and help those in need at the same time.
I've got some terrific news.
ETM offers the diversification of the entire technology sector.